to Process to Perform, helping you harness your potential on the way to greatness. I'm your host, Mike Wall. Thanks as always for listening. If you're enjoying, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, and I believe now we are on the iHeartRadio platform, so you can find us there. We talked last week a lot about, I took a step back last week and really tried to open up about, what sports mean to me, and especially, going through this with my kids and going through this situation that we're all in right now, just trying to gain a little bit of perspective because sometimes it gets pretty wild around here. This week, I want to talk about off-season training and particularly how that pertains to the organization your athlete is working with. The state of reality that we're all in right now is that we're all essentially training for next year, whether that next year is in our fall or whether that next year is literally in next January. And I've had two things in my world come up this week that are relevant to the discussion. The first, the NFL is starting off-season training programs this week. I think 12 this week, and then the rest of them are coming in the next couple of weeks, but they're starting virtually. Virtual team meetings, virtual strength conditioning sessions, hopefully virtual technical field work. Present a number of challenges, but also for me, and we've talked about this before, it's just a vast number of opportunities at the individual development level, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And the second, both my kids play competitive youth soccer, and the United States Soccer Federation has shuttered the Development Academy, the DA program, as of this week. And the DA program was considered by the United States Soccer Federation and by the United States Soccer Federation only as kind of the top tier level competition in America. And it is a fitting end to an unsuccessful program, honestly. It does leave a vacuum in the developmental model, particularly as sports have been put on an extended break during this isolation period. So teams and players are not only wondering where they're going to play next year, but they're also now stuck in a situation where coaches and organizations who don't have a ton of resources to begin with have to switch their mindset from developing their athletes to a lot of this organizational clerical work. And who suffers ultimately because of that? The athlete, the end user. So while we're talking about two sports that are arguably on the opposite ends of the spectrum, we're talking about professional athletes versus aspiring young athletes. There's a couple things that are happening that are going to happen that are going to dramatically affect all of the athletes' ability to develop in the short term and the long term. As you know, I try to emphasize every episode that the difference between the pro and the aspiring kid shouldn't be the desire or the effort. It's going to be the resources available and on many levels, the knowledge that comes from experience. But in this instance, we're all in the same boat. Nobody's gone through this before. And from a resource standpoint, we're actually limited by what we can find at the house. So what's the best we can hope for regarding the continual development of our players and that interaction with the organization during the offseason? Now, I speak with a lot of NFL players, ex-players, and NFL organizations. I haven't spoken with every NFL organization, but I'm guessing they're all going to be sending out virtual links to players with designated meeting times, workout routines, etc. They have, arguably assembled the greatest coaching and strength conditioning staffs in the world, and so they're going to use that capital, those resources, in order to continue to help these players. And while it's a ton of extra work, you have innovation in those buildings and they understand the importance of developing their athletes. So you're going to get a very quality product. Some good stuff is going to come out of this. But you have so many other things to contend with. And I'm not talking about just whether or not we're going to be able to play and all the organizational hoopla that goes around that. But we start talking about technical development and individual learning styles that you'd have to contend with in the building, routine development, behavioral awareness, all the things that are not necessarily addressed at every level with every player now anyways, when they're in the building. How do we continue to develop the entire body of work for these athletes right now? And that's probably the question on the mind of every organizational head, not only in professional sports, but at every competitive level from youth up to high school pro, and then high school college, and then obviously up to pro. And so the crux of this argument at least from the NFL organizational standpoint is the same argument they've had for years, or the same gripe is, how are they going to get enough face time with their players? And this is always a conversation around the collective bargaining agreement negotiations, the CBA. But because of the pandemic, it's really brought that level of anxiety to a forefront. When I was drafted by the Packers in 1998, we had no offseason program, meaning that future Hall of Famers like Brett Favre and Reggie White, guys like Mark Shimura, Leroy Butler, they didn't spend more than 13 days in Lambeau Field before the preseason started. We had 2 3-day mini camps, and we had a 7 or 8-day mini camp, depending on the coach. In June, we were out for 6 weeks, and we came back and the preseason started. So when I hear the idea that we're not getting enough face time with our players, I kind of chuckle because, you got to ask yourself, well, God, how did Brett Favre and Reggie White and Leroy, how did those guys, how did they make it? How did they get so good? Because, and I don't only address this because of the coronavirus and because of the situation that we're in right now. The answer is that they were able to take control of their careers. They sought out help where it was needed. They learned new methods from multiple sources, and they found out what made the most sense for them to develop. They learned how to make the best decisions by presenting the healthiest, strongest, fastest version of themselves to the team, and presenting the best technical and knowledgeable version of themselves, allowing for that decision-making that we know is so important. I bring this point up only because of the situation that we're in. I understand the value of off-season training. I understand the value of having your players together and creating that culture from an early standpoint. But I also see the value from a player standpoint of presenting the best possible product to the team that has performance and financial consequences for that individual athlete. Now, my story, I was in 1998 when I get drafted. They don't have this offseason program, so I was able to go out and seek help when I needed help, where I needed help, and foster that kind of curiosity about your profession. I went to Athletes First just outside of King of Prussia in Philadelphia when my wife was finishing up college in Philly. The next year, we went out to see arguably the greatest strength and conditioning coach in college right now, Chris Doyle out at Iowa. That same year, I got to meet Coach Joe Moore, one of the greatest offensive line collegiate coaches of all time, and work with him. We moved to Las Vegas. I got to work out with Mark Philippi nearly every day, one of the world's strongest man competitors, a guy that can really teach you a lot about developing that competitive mindset and that kind of grit, mental toughness, and perseverance. Through him, I met Ed Cohn. I got to train with arguably the greatest pound-for-pound power lifter in the world. Ed Cohn, learned a lot of technical work from him and his mindset, performance mindset, especially in those sports that are different than ours, where you're the only man up on the platform. Got to work with a Muay Thai expert, Jose Rogers, in San Diego. Later in my career, at 27, 28 years old, I went out to see Chad Ike, who was an Olympic powerlifter. He was from the Charles Poliquin line, and his routine, his methodology, his nutritional regimen, he really affected my process for the positive. Even at a late stage where I thought I was already, kind of at my physical peak, he took me to a next level. And with all of this, it's just, the accumulation of your experiences becomes who you are, and that's who you're presenting to these teams. And you want to present, obviously, the best version of yourself. Even at the elite level, if you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, don't expect a different result. The top athletes in the world are on their own programs, not necessarily away from the team, but in addition to the team, because they understand the value of tapping into what makes them unique. And to be crystal clear, team programs are valuable, and this is no way an affront on the methods of the organizations currently in the league or any professional league. I'm only suggesting that this pandemic gives the players great opportunity to learn more about themselves, their process, their routines, their areas of opportunity. When it becomes less about punching a clock and more about learning about yourself, I find that people are more likely to expand their consumption of information. Players today are different, and organizations know that better than anyone. They've grown up in an environment where youth sports are a huge market. They have people pulling at them from 10, 12 years old. Social media, YouTube videos, adults telling them how great they are. Their path, their direction is laid out in front of them. And so what happens to players oftentimes that don't have their own process, don't have something they can hold dear to them? When things go bad, they don't know how to correct it. They don't know how to ask questions. They don't know how to fix the problem. And that sometimes looks like they're being complacent or lazy. I hear that a lot from coaches and organizations at higher levels is this guy's lazy, this guy's complacent. I think more often than not, they've just been told what to do for so long, they don't know how to think for themselves. And you need to go in and have a program where athletes can learn or relearn how to think for themselves, be proactive, and become a master of their own destiny. So this opportunity that we have in isolation is an opportunity to learn how to improve one's process by finding a favorite player or team to study, by finding the type of training that gives you the best version of yourself, finding the technical routine that helps you dial in, and taking time to explore the idea of behavioral cueing and educating oneself in that process. These make you a more valuable asset, and I promise you, the top players in the NFL, the NBA, soccer, they all know exactly what I'm talking about right now because they have spent the time to best understand what makes them tick, how to turn the right dials in their process. And they've sought out different ways to improve. They've created routines. They've gone through all of this for years and years. How does this apply to the youth soccer landscape or any youth sport that's halted their team or individual development model? If we as coaches and parents provide a framework and access to information, then these aspiring athletes can now really dive into the nuts and bolts of becoming subject matter experts on their sport or their sports. And there's no pressure right now. I was in a conference call a couple weeks ago, and this one guy just said it was great because his kid doesn't feel the pressure, so he's just free to create and explore and figure out what works best for him. And I thought that was just such a good point. You can go out and learn new skills now, work on your set pieces, become ambidextrous, start doing pull-ups. You can go look up the history of the game, and you can understand everything there is to know about your position. I was lucky enough to play pretty high level rugby after football, and I played with a bunch of international players. And one thing that overseas players have more than we do is a sense of history. And the Last Dance show came up on ESPN this week, and if you haven't seen it, oh good Lord, Michael Jordan. To put it in context, my son who doesn't play doesn't play basketball, he just plays soccer, but he stopped the show about halfway through and he said, "This guy is better at basketball than anybody I've ever seen do anything ever." And he's got Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, stickers and jerseys and everything everywhere. Those are his kind of heroes. And Michael Jordan was just something else, just unbelievable to watch. But I can't get into a basketball conversation with somebody in their 20s right now without somebody in their room declaring they haven't even watched a Michael Jordan game. And you think about Muhammad Ali and Mickey Mantle, Jordan, most of our current athletes, they barely even know who they are, and they've certainly never studied their game tape. But go to Italy and ask about Andrea Pirlo, or travel to New Zealand and just drop the name Jonah in casual conversation, or talk about Christian Cullen. I mean, these guys are legends in their countries, legends in their sports. Current players, they study their moves and their routines as part of their youth curriculum. And so does this make them better at their own craft? Does this make current players better at their own craft? I mean, maybe. But more than anything, it fosters a sense of curiosity, and it gives these young players motivation and direction. My daughter's recovering from a knee injury. She had surgery in December, and she's working extremely hard, and we're not only proud of her, but happy with where she's at currently. And it's a difficult process, but I do see the parallels between her situation and what everyone else is now dealing with. Because you're away from sport, you're not allowed to play. You can't play. And so what are the opportunities when you can't play? Learn the tactics of your game. Learn the tactics of your game. Watch YouTube videos on your favorite players and teams. Understand what offensive and defensive schemes they run and why they run them. What are the weak points? How can you exploit those schemes? Give yourself a personalized plan. Sit down and recognize your areas of opportunity as you see them. Write them down and take control. You still have access to coaches, online trainings, endless hours of video on the internet. Go find what you're looking for. I hear parents say all the time that their kids think the trainings are getting a little stale, a little boring. And I know one of the big concerns from coaching staffs, especially with youth sports, is that they're just going to lose kids. Kids are going to get tired of not being able to play. And I kind of look at it like, well, of course they're boring. We're social animals. This sucks. No one wants to be in this situation. Everyone wants to play games, but We do have an opportunity to affect meaningful change, but we have to approach it from a different standpoint. We have to start challenging kids in new ways. I talk about my progression stack all the time, talking about going from static movement to dynamic movement, adding distractions or forcing them to make decisions, adding a situational or sequential element, and then finally going live. And we can't do those last two. We can't add situational or sequential, and we can't go live necessarily without a team. But ask yourself, are you training past the static movement right now, or are you training to make decisions or adding distractions into your training? Because everybody can do that. If you have access to a ball or whatever apparatus you use for your sport in a small space, we can change the intensity and quality of practice by turning dials other than people and equipment. Coaches, are we being creative and asking our players to do a little bit more? Do we know how to build out that kind of progression stack? What about scheme? Are we learning the concepts behind what you do, what is expected of your teammates, and how opponents will try and stop you at all levels? Could you teach a master class on your system or your sport right now? Because this is curiosity at its finest. Committing to teaching the why, learning the why, so that when we do return to competition, we've leapfrogged past where we were in February or early March. And this is the opportunity there for everyone. And I promise you, as players and parents, there are good coaches out there dying to relay information to kids, to young athletes, to competitive athletes. They want to develop relationships with you and your family. They want to transfer knowledge to hungry athletes of any age. Resources are not the issue right now. There are plenty of, there's this podcast, there's videos, there's blogs, there's coaches that are willing to work with kids right now. There's information that's already available if you're curious. I know if your child's curious, give them an assignment. Here's a call to action. Pull up your pyramid, your Master of Craft pyramid, and think about how you can improve in every area from home with limited equipment and resources. So just start with one. Take a drill that is a technical drill and figure out how to turn it into a decision-making or a drill with distraction. So that's your call to action. Get a piece of paper, or you can do this on a video camera. Find your favorite drill. If your coaches are sending you drills, pick your favorite, explain it, explain the nuances of it, and now figure out how to add a distraction or figure out something you can add to that drill to make a decision. Be creative. I'll give you a couple ideas. You can use colored disc cones. Different cones mean different things. You can take an iPhone and use it as a voice recorder, record commands or cadences and run them on loop. You can use different colored flashlights. There's so many ways to create distractions or to associate objects or movements with action or decision making. And that's really what we're trying to do, right? Is create those opportunities to improve your ability to make decisions. Force yourself to focus, because that's how we grow. That's how we get better. Pull out a stopwatch and make sure you're doing the drill as fast as possible. Challenge yourself right now. Figure out and share with your friends. Get that social component. Share this with others. Put it out there. Put it out with your own team. There are so many ways to stay motivated, and I think youth clubs have done a very good job right now of keeping up with video conferences and team meetups, and I think it's great. All I'm suggesting and all I'm relaying to coaches that I talk with is if we take the time that we spent in preparation for practice and practice itself, and we use that time to create meaningful game or situational challenges and video catalogs, positional training plans, routine developers. I mean, we have that time. Let's use it, because what is more important really for an organization than the continued improvement of their greatest asset? We will play sports again. We want to make sure that the development of this generation of kids is not hindered because they have to be in isolation. And really, to me, this brings it back full circle. As athletes, don't settle for the minimum right now. Don't tick a box. You have an opportunity. There's not a better time to get in touch with developing yourself, fostering curiosity. We talk about it all the time, but really see what else you can do to get better at your sport right now. Whether you're a 5-year professional athlete, whether you're an Olympian, whether you're a high school kid or a 12-year-old, what else can you do to improve? What's something that's unique about you that you can exploit to make better and make yourself separate from everyone else? All right, we should be putting out another podcast, I think, on Sunday, so hope you enjoyed this one. Please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Again, I'm your host, Mike Wall. This is Process to Perform. Have a good week, everyone.